Hey, remember that time where some guy threatened Indy with a sword, so Indy just pulls out his gun and shoots him? Guess who forgot about that?
Arrogant Americana.
Yeah, it was me. That's me. Whoops.
Hello there.
The show sold out, sir.
Hold on.
No seats, no standing room, no exceptions.
Okay, let's get 2025 started right by covering an ancient DOS game which has been highly requested. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. Now, first thing off the bat, there's a chance, although not a very likely chance, that you'll be looking at this game and wondering, what the heck? Like, you've played a game with that title on a DOS PC before, but it didn't look anything like this. Well, Lucasfilm Games was trying something interesting with their original Indiana Jones titles, whereby for each game they wanted to make, they actually made two games released together. One titled as a graphic adventure, the other titled as an action game. They did this for this title, and they also did this for their earlier Indiana Jones game, The Last Crusade. Maybe someday we'll take a look at the action game, but for now we're taking a look at the graphic adventure. And having never played it before until now, I can safely say that this game was ambitious. This game does a lot of different things, and it's literally impossible to see or do all of them in a single run through the game, facilitating a minimum of 3 runs through the game if you want to experience everything. Plus, the game has a lot of randomized elements, meaning you actually have to pay attention to succeed, since on subsequent runs, you may encounter situations which don't play out the same, despite taking the same steps to get there. However, this is also a game which starts strong but ends poorly. Like, the initial puzzles and challenges can be a little tricky and sometimes asinine, but are otherwise manageable. But the last chunk of the game, when you finally reach Atlantis, is kind of a mess, with half of the puzzles not really making a whole lot of sense. Not to mention one puzzle which is solved by using the freaking look command, which is always a kick in the teeth when a game pulls that kind of nonsense. I mean, really, as a whole, the game isn't bad. It just does a number of things which are irksome until you know that they're there and how to deal with them. Then you'll do alright. Usually.
What was the purpose of this chamber?
You have me there. Some sort of crypt?
Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis was developed and published by Lucasfilm Games in 1992, prior to their name change to LucasArts, and is a one-player, inventory-based adventure game. Which, yes, I know the more proper term is graphic adventure. Calling it inventory-based adventure is just something I got in the habit of doing as a kid to help differentiate such games from other adventure titles, and I've been doing it ever since, so try not to read too much into it. Most people who play this game will be playing it in its MCGA 320x200 256 color video mode. However, the game does support a 640x200 16 color mode, whereby each pixel of MCGA data is converted down to 2 pixels of EGA data, just in case you're playing the game on an older computer lacking MCGA or VGA graphics support. As for audio, it supports the AdLib, PC Speaker, Roland MT32, and Sound Blaster cards. Though I believe with the CD Enhanced release, the voice effects are only supported through Sound Blaster. As for its current release state, it's still commercial but readily available as a digital download from both GOG and Steam for $6. Now I have the GOG release, which primarily defaults to using the ScummVM emulator, but does have all of the files necessary to play through DOS emulation or on a real DOS system. And there's just a little bit of extra configuration you have to do if you want to do that with the GOG release. As for Steam, I have no idea what files it comes with, so if anyone knows, please let me know so I can add those details into the video description. But if by chance you want a physical copy, prepare for a lot of pain. This is a game which is extremely common. I found close to 100 copies for sale when I went searching, but the prices are so incredibly erratic. I mean, just for a loose CD, you could end up spending as little as $5 or as much as $40, and people do, which is the scary thing. Meaning the reason people are getting away with charging these ludicrous prices is because there's a ton of demand for the game. And that's just for the loose CD, to say nothing of fully boxed copies, which can end up selling for as little as $60 or as much as $200. And that's not even counting the speculator nonsense, where some sealed copies are being offered up for quadruple digits. Yeah, getting a physical copy of this game is just kind of nuts right now, but relatively low prices do show up if you're patient. The other thing to consider is that there's numerous different releases of this title, and not just for different platforms, but even different media, with there being a 5¼ disc release, a 3½ disc release, and the enhanced CD-ROM release just for DOS. And there's not a lot to go on to distinguish them all from each other. Thus, if you decide you want to plop down money for a physical copy, make sure you're seeing a lot of photos of the actual media or box you're getting to make sure you're getting the exact version you want. Don't just go by what sellers are stating in their listings.
All right, Jones, how you gonna find that statue and all this junk?
Skipping the story section this time around, since, as is typical for an Indiana Jones story, you don't really get a lot to go on going into it. You're just sort of thrust into the adventure. Although, at the start of the game, as Indy's smashing through a window into this room here, you quickly realize this is part of the college he works at, and are left to wonder who's going to be paying to fix all that damage. Before the game begins proper though, you're first playing as Indy trying to find a particular artifact in the college, which a visitor by the name of Mr. Smith seems to have a key for. Now, upon returning to Smith with the artifact, they open it and a small bead falls out, which in that moment doesn't seem like anything too special, except you quickly learn before too long that this bead is made out of a mythical metal known as orichalcum, which, alas, has nothing to do with orcs and isn't green, but that's beside the point. Upon seeing this bead, Smith pulls a gun and attempts to leave with both it and the artifact. Indy jumps him when he gets the opportunity, and while Indy fails to stop Smith from escaping, he does grab his coat, within which is a passport revealing Mr. Smith is actually one Klaus Kerner of the Third Reich, basically an agent of the Nazis. Indy then points out to his colleague that the artifact is almost certainly real, despite professing it to be a fake to try and throw Kerner off the trail. This sets Indy on the road to reuniting with an old acquaintance by the name of Sophia Hapgood, a scientist turned psychic who may be mixed up in all of this, and ultimately follows a trailblazing path to several locations across the globe to try and discover the lost city of Atlantis before the Nazis do. As was common for games using the Scum engine, this one presents you with your actions in the lower left corner. And clicking on something in the world without first clicking on an action will either walk up to that thing and or look at it. Right-clicking instead will perform the most obvious action on that thing, or if you want to perform a specific action, you need to click on that action first, then click on the thing you want to perform that action on. The right section at the bottom is your inventory, which amazingly doesn't really get used all that much in the first couple parts of the game. It isn't until you get to Atlantis where the inventory really starts piling up with tons of different items. Now, once you've got Sophia on your side, the next leg of the journey involves trying to find a particular book known as the Hermocrates. Yeah, Hermocrates. I just wanted to make everyone twitch at my horrible pronunciation for a moment. But yeah, you eventually get a lead on this document, realize it's actually part of a collection at the college Indy works at, and once acquired, the game has you making a rather interesting decision, determining the path you will take to reach Atlantis. Yeah, once you get to this moment of the game, you have to make a decision as to which path you're going to follow from one of three choices: the team path, the wits path, or the fists path. Now, if you decide you want Sophia to go with you, that's the team path. If you decide to go it alone using your deductive reasoning, that's the wits path. Or if you want to just punch your way through every problem, that's the fists path. The game will actually make an attempt to determine which path is right for you prior to making this decision based on your actions up to that point, but you're not forced down any of these paths. You can freely choose which to follow regardless of which the game thinks you're going to follow. This is also what ties into the IQ point system in place, known as Indie Quotient Points. The game has 1,000 total points to earn from playing through it. However, it's not possible to earn every point on a single playthrough, since because of the whole path system in place, certain points are only available on certain paths. Thus, your IQ points are measured as a current quantity for your current run, and a total quantity across all runs ever attempted. Really, it's just a more complicated way of measuring how much of the game you've experienced. In any event, this is where the game diverges considerably, since the path you decide on determines where you will go and what you will do when you get there. For instance, on the team path, when you go to Algiers to look around for an object you need, you get a pair of camels to explore with, but they end up dying, forcing you through a puzzle of trading for food and getting a ticket and a knife in order to float up in a giant hydrogen balloon, and then cut yourself loose to freely explore the surrounding area, and then some Nazi soldier shoots you out of the air, though at least that soldier is kind enough to brace your fall.
Ow! I've seen better landings.
On the fist path instead though, when you go to Algiers, there's a lot more motion in and around the streets, and you're given a different puzzle of following an assistant to a particular location, at which point a fist fight ensues with another Nazi agent, and following which you get a camel, which is a lot more sturdy than the ones you got on the team path, allowing you to explore the surrounding areas in that manner instead. Actually, this is a good time to answer a question one of my Patreon supporters, Martin, had about this game, as he asked, for the trading section in Algiers, to get the squab on a stick from the grocer, team path, is it completely random which item from Omar the grocer accepts? Well, the short answer is yes, it's 100% RNG. But I investigated this more deeply and found out that particular puzzle has an interesting dynamic to it, which makes it possible to always successfully get the right item for trade in just 4 tries or less. In fact, those of you watching may be able to figure it out just by my posting the list up on screen. These are the 16 different trading items you can acquire for this puzzle, and keeping in mind you always start with a mask, which the grocer will never accept, so you always have to give that back to Omar in exchange for the baseball at the very least, and then each time you ask Omar for something else, he'll always go in order down this list, eventually looping around back to the top. Though if you get hints from the grocer as to what would interest him, you can have Omar narrow down your selections appropriately. Now, every time you bring one of these items to the grocer, there's one of 4 possible outcomes. He'll either say he never buys things for himself and never in that color, he'll decline but say the color is agreeable, he'll decline but will be reminded he needs to get a gift for a particular person, or he will accept it and give you the squab. If the grocer says he never buys for himself in that color, you want to go back to Omar and cycle ahead by 5 items. If the grocer gives you a hint, then you simply ask Omar to narrow things down, and then just go one at a time until you hit the right item. The reason this methodology works, and will guarantee you will hit the right item in 4 tries or less, is because of how this list is ordered. The colors of all of the items starts as white, then black, then red, then yellow, and cycles like that the whole way down, while the first 4 items would appeal to the grocer's son, the next 4 to his grandfather, the next 4 to his mother-in-law, and the last 4 to his wife. Yeah, you see the pattern now, don't you? In terms of when the RNG is rolled on this puzzle, I don't know exactly when it happens, but it's definitely at some point immediately upon or sometime after you first speak to the grocer. Meaning, if you already have one of the possible items to trade, there is a 1 in 16 chance, 6.25%, that he will accept that item then and there, saving you from having to do any of this puzzle sequence. No matter what path you take though, you ultimately end up at Atlantis. But lo and behold, the Nazis got there first. Go figure. Up to this point, the game has been a little challenging, but nothing too egregious. But this is the point where things just get a little nuts. Firstly, this is another section where you start off in total darkness, which doesn't help matters, but thankfully the game takes a little mercy on you and extremely slowly raises the light level as you stumble around until you figure out exactly how to light things up. But once you make it into Atlantis properly, you're going to find the place is freaking huge, and there's a whole bunch of rooms to explore where you don't know what you're going to find. So your next task is to map the place out while avoiding the guards. Though these guards aren't exactly the brightest. Like, they won't attack unless they're right on top of you, and even then, you can run away from them. You don't have to fight them. right? Anyways, after exploring around a bit, one thing you're going to hopefully realize sooner than I did is that you are absolutely going to need the ladder you used right from the start to enter Atlantis in the first place. So make sure you remember to take it with you or go back and get it if you didn't. Eventually, you'll learn that the orichalcum is made by pouring lava into a special machine. You'll get a huge number of beads all at once with the ability to make even more if needed, and eventually, you make it past the outer circle and are faced with a giant octopus. Okay, whatever, I'll feed it some bread or something. Or, wait, that didn't work. How are you supposed to placate this octopus? I mean, there's a bunch of crabs running around, maybe it likes seafood? Except you're not allowed to click on the crabs. There is a room where the crabs seem to come and go through a well in the floor. But how do we trap one? Oh, I know! I've got a skeletal rib cage which might do the trick. I don't think this is working. Okay, I give up. What's the official hint book say? Now it says I need a trap and bait. In fact, it explicitly says I can bait the trap with gum, cold cuts, bread, or a submarine sandwich. Well, all I've got is bread, so let's go with that, and it doesn't work. Okay, seriously, when your official hint book is giving bad advice, that's crossing a line. Actually, wait, the hint book also says, if for some reason you don't have any of the above ingredients, you're going to have to beat up one of the guards and take his lunch. Oh boy, so, my first run through the game, I took the team path. You don't do any fighting on the team path, meaning I got to these final moments in the game without having done any fist fighting. So let's talk about how stupid this fighting system is. The way it works is that both Indy and the person being fought will have a power gauge and a health gauge. You use the merit keypad to set whether you're blocking high, mid, or low attacks, and also have keys to make high, mid, or low punches. When you make a punch, your power gauge drops back to minimum and has to charge back up. But you can punch no matter where the power gauge is at. The trick is that the higher it is, the more health your opponent will lose if the blow lands. Your opponent will also be making gestures indicating where they are preparing to attack from, but it can be incredibly hard to read these gestures, plus they can change just a frame or two before they actually attack, meaning it might as well just be RNG whether they attack high, mid, or low. This complex fighting system, which should have been really interesting and intricate, unfortunately boils down to mashing punches as the best strategy for winning, since successful hits stun the opponent for a split second, preventing changing blocking stances or punching back. But I didn't know that when I hit this moment in the game, so I really struggled trying to survive this fight. Not to mention, you can theoretically perform these fights with the mouse, but that's just a recipe for failure, so it's better to use the keyboard, except you can't by default. You have to press the F key at an appropriate moment to turn keyboard fighting on, and even if you do this, you may find out that you still can't use the keyboard to fight back because the reference card with the fighting controls explicitly states to turn numlock off when in fact it needs to be on. I swear, it's like the fighting mechanics were put in at the last minute or something. Although, truth be told, I'm technically getting angry over nothing, since virtually every fight in the game can be won with a single keystroke, as the game incorporates a special sucker punch key you can press to end a fight then and there. Though you don't get any IQ points for doing this, thus why I elected to try and avoid using it for my entire duration of playing the game. But given that it usually took me several attempts to win each fight, I fully understand why they put that key in there, because even the devs probably realized they created a monster of a fighting system and didn't want to force players to have to endure it just to succeed. I mean, unless they wanted those IQ points. So yeah, I'm not going to spoil too much more about the Atlantis portion of the game, except to say that the game technically has 2 proper endings, 3 if you count one of the game over endings, and to actually get either of the proper endings requires navigating your way through one of the most annoying dialogue trees in the entire game, which is annoying to the point where, again, I almost thought the game didn't have a proper ending until I looked at the hint book again, saw the recommended dialogue tree path, and realized what was going on and why it seemed like I was stuck in a perpetual dialogue loop. which either never ended or ended in my demise, since the solution involves starting the perpetual cycle, and then one of the options, which sounds like it would just continue it, actually becomes your way out of it.
So, the legend of a labyrinth hidden under the ruins of Knossos is true. The legend of Atlantis isn't any more far-fetched. Maybe it's true too.
Before I give my overall opinion of this game, I feel I should point out that I'm actually not a fan of the Indiana Jones franchise. I mean, I get why people are, don't get me wrong, but one of the ways in which I connect with media is when I identify with a main character in some manner. And to that end, I find the character of Indiana Jones incredibly unlikable and not even slightly relatable, thus why I've never been a fan of the franchise. And yes, I've seen the first 4 movies, so I know how it goes. This is not an uninformed opinion by any stretch. But that kind of puts me in a good place to judge the quality of this game as a game, since I have no nostalgia for the franchise as a whole. To that end, my overall opinion of Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is that it's a decent game taken as a whole, but has some major quirks to watch out for in the late game, not to mention a fairly boneheaded fighting system, if you end up having to deal with it. Definitely worth playing for fans of the franchise or anyone who likes adventure games on the PC, but for everyone else, you're not really missing much by skipping on this one, especially given that, unlike most other LucasArts titles, the quality of the voice acting in this one is average at best. As with most Scum engine games, if you plan to play this in DOSBox and not through ScummVM, you need to set a relatively low fixed cycles count or the sound system won't initialize properly. My recommendation this time around is 10,000 cycles. Also, if you're playing the GOG release and want to get it working in a DOS environment, be it real or emulated, what you need to do is go to the folder you installed the game to, go into the subfolder in there called Other, and move every file in that folder one level up into the parent folder you installed the game to. This allows all of the game's files to recognize each other properly while playing in DOS, as the files in the other folder are only needed under those circumstances. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now, on January 25th, will be another review, episode 338, where we're going to be taking a look at a very old driving game, which is effectively, in essence, one ginormous advertisement. I doubt the advertising has any merit nowadays, but the program itself has a surprising amount to it, and it technically qualifies as a game, so yeah, definitely stay tuned to see this weird little piece of DOS gaming history.
I don't need any old bones.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me over on Patreon. If you'd also like to support the show directly and get some extra perks, then head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.